Welcome back to another episode of the Penn State Show here on DK Sports Radio. As always, I am your host, Penn State beat writer Audrey Snyder, and I'm coming to you today from Dallas, the site of the 2018 NFL Draft. I'll be out here keeping tabs on, of course, no other than Saquon Barkley. The draft kicks off officially Thursday night at 8 p.m. when the Cleveland Browns will be on the clock, and we will all wait and see where Saquon Barkley goes, whether that's number 1 to Cleveland, whether it's number 2 to the Giants, or if he even lasts after that. I'll dig into that a little bit here. Been an interesting week in the Penn State world. Of course, the Nittany Lions wrapped up the spring practice session last Saturday with the blue-white game, so I'll dig into that a little bit as well in the second half of the show, but let's kick it off with all draft, and because I was up at an ungodly early, awful hour this morning for my flight out of the University Park Airport. Who knows where the show goes today? We will have to see. Add in the fact that I ate way too much barbecue about an hour ago out at the Pecan Lodge here in Dallas. So we will have to see where this show takes us. But I'm looking forward to checking out the draft, of course, Thursday at AT&T Stadium. And I've never been inside the venue over there. I was out here last time in Dallas back in 2011 when Penn State, as many of you I'm sure remember, played in the infamous, now defunct, Ticket City Bowl. So it's been a little while since I've been back here, so I will be checking all of that out. Of course, I'll have some coverage along the way. I'll be heading over to the NFL Draft Experience at some point on Thursday, probably in the afternoon, and we will see just how big Dallas does this draft, which, by the sounds of it, by what I've seen online with different mock-ups and those sorts of things, it looks like this could be the best setup yet, which certainly is saying something in a league that tries to constantly one-up itself. And after all the rave reviews that Philadelphia got last year for hosting the NFL Draft, Dallas will move it inside into AT&T Stadium, and they're rearranging it so the lower bowl, half of that, my understanding is half of that will be open. They will also bring in some of the most hardcore fans from all 32 of the NFL teams to set up cheering sections. And then Barkley will be among the 22 players who will be in the green room. So that, of course, is always where we see guys, we see their dreams come true, and then notoriously every year there are a handful of players who have to sit in there and wait it out. So we'll have to see. I'd be absolutely stunned if Saquon Barkley is still there beyond those top 4 picks. I just can't see a scenario where that plays out. But again, this draft, I think, is set up to be more different than some we've seen in the previous years just because there's so many unknowns. I mean, here we are. At the time I'm recording this, we're about 30 hours away from the start of the draft, and right now, everybody you talk to will seemingly give you a different number 1 overall pick. So is it Sam Darnold? Is it Saquon Barkley? Is it even Baker Mayfield, the name that's been kind of picking up some steam here in the last few days? So we'll have to see. But the NFL Draft will most likely be the second most important thing that happens to Saquon Barkley this week. He became a dad Tuesday night, so there certainly was some concern there if he would even make it out to Dallas for the draft because of the birth of his daughter, but that has since happened, so he is slated to be out here for all the festivities. James Franklin will also be out here on Thursday as well as Penn State's former running backs coach Charles Huff, who, of course, recruited and then coached Saquon Barkley, so it'll be really cool to get those guys back together. And one of the things I had a chance to write about this week on the site in regards to the NFL Draft is just the uncertainties that surround it. You look at these players, and everything up until this point in their life has been about preparing as much as they possibly can, whether that's with camps, that's then the recruiting process, playing that out, weighing their options, getting to college, preparing again physically, mentally, emotionally. But when it comes to Thursday night, all of that's out of their control. You know, Roger Goodell's going to stand up there. He's going to present Saquon Barkley with a jersey at some point Thursday night. And in that instant, Barkley's life will drastically change. You know, he'll go from being a typical college kid to a multimillionaire, in a matter of moments. And that's what I think has always really intrigued me about the draft process in general, is just the stories behind it. And I think one of the more intriguing storylines this year as it relates to Penn State is the fact that the Nittany Lions have a chance to break their record that they set in 2010 when they had 6 players selected. So up until this point, and again, keep in mind, this is a Penn State team that only had 1 player drafted last year, and wide receiver Chris Godwin, who went in the 3rd round to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So by all accounts, this was expected to be a very big draft class for Penn State. I am projecting that they will top that mark from 2010, so I'm saying that they will have more than 6 guys drafted between Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And Penn State also has a shot to have multiple players selected in the 1st round. Now, this might be a little bit more of a long shot, but remember, as always with the draft, it only takes 1 team to fall in love with a guy. And the reason that Penn State might have 2 guys selected in the 1st round, of course, is because of tight end Mike Gesicki. He's projected between the 1st and the 2nd round, and depending who you ask, I think is where this one gets really interesting. Because as Penn State fans know with Mike, it's always been about, okay, the athleticism and the mismatch that he presents as this oversized wide receiver who hadn't played it down as a tight end until he got to college. Of course, the flip side of that has been his blocking. So do teams like him enough that they're going to kind of take a flyer on him, which in the 1st round, you better be pretty darn sure of what you're getting and go that route, or does he slip into that 2nd round and we then see him go Friday? We'll have to see. But should Gesicki and Barkley both go Thursday night, that would also mark the first time that Penn State would have multiple players selected in the 1st round since 2003. Of course, many fans remember that 2003 draft class as Jimmy Kennedy, Michael Haynes, Bryant Johnson, and of course Larry Johnson. So historically, there's some interesting things at play for Penn State throughout the 3-day course of this draft. And you look and then you say, okay, Thursday night is going to be Barkley's night. Maybe that also turns into Mike Gesicki's night as well later on in the 1st round. But then as this thing moves into Friday, that's when I think you'll see Deshaun Hamilton go off the board, potentially as early as the 3rd round. Remember just how much Hamilton's really helped himself since the season ended with all the various events, the Senior Bowl in particular, where he really shined. I mean, this is a guy whose draft stock has gone from, late round, crept up to middle round, and now we're looking at this is somebody who could go in the 3rd round. So remember, he ran a 4.52 second 40-yard dash at Penn State's Pro Day last month. So people, teams had a lot of questions about his straight-ahead, straight-line speed. So you look at that and you say, okay, presumably that question has been answered. Hamilton himself had said that he thinks he's the best route runner in this draft class. So we'll have to see what the draft entails for him. But when you kind of look at those day 2 guys, certainly Hamilton and then safety Marcus Allen is the other name to know. You look at Marcus Allen there and you say, okay, maybe he's a 3rd rounder, maybe he's a 4th. Some teams reportedly have him projected with a 2nd round grade. It gets interesting with Allen. I mean, again, he could be that hybrid linebacker safety guy. I mean, keep in mind, this is somebody who started for 3.5 years. So there's certainly a lot of value there, but does he become somebody who we see go Friday, or does he go on Saturday? That, of course, will be among the storylines. And then I think the focal point for Penn State Saturday during day 3 of the draft, which kicks off at noon, is going to be just how many of these defensive backs get drafted, because you look at it and you say, okay, Marcus Allen's going to go at some point, whether that be Friday or Saturday. Then you add Grant Haley into the mix. You add Troy Apke in there as well, the safety who really helped himself after posting the fastest 40-yard dash time among safeties out at the Combine. Then you add Christian Campbell in there. And Campbell's a guy who, because of his size, some teams are saying he could be a late-round selection. Maybe he becomes an undrafted free agent. We'll have to see. And, of course, there's always that argument to be made as well and say, okay, guys who go undrafted, potentially when you get to that point later on in the draft, typically they have a better chance of being able to choose and go undrafted and kind of choose their situation as opposed to going to somebody, late in the 7th round. They'd hear their name called, but again, at least by going undrafted, you kind of can pick and choose. And the other guy, projected late rounder for the Nittany Lions, is Jason Cabinda. So Cabinda, of course, you look at the body of work. I think this is a guy who's going to be fighting for a roster spot come August. But in order to do that, he's going to have to continue to prove his value as a special teamer. So that, to me, is the one to watch. But if you take that into account, and you say Cabinda gets drafted, you say all these guys that I mentioned get drafted, that gives Penn State 8 guys. You have Barkley, Gesicki, Allen, Deshaun Hamilton, Christian Campbell, Grant Haley, Troy Apke, and Jason Kabinda. So that, of course, would be the second most draft picks for the Nittany Lions overall. And that, of course, would date back to 1996 when they had 10 players selected. So I was doing some combing through the archives this week to come up with that number. But the most draft picks they've had, at least in the 7-round format, came in 1996. So keep that in mind as you're tuning in and watching, wherever you may be watching, listening from. And then, of course, after that, there's always the potential undrafted free agents for Penn State, guys who maybe get a look in rookie minicamp, stuff like that. People like Curtis Cothran, Parker Cothran, Saeed Blacknall, offensive tackle, and really versatile lineman Brendan Mann. So do those guys get a shot? You have to see, is Brandon Smith a guy who maybe gets one look in camp, or does he want to focus on his medical career, which of course is his other option. So all in all, the draft will continue to entertain as always, and I look forward to bringing you the coverage from out here on site in Dallas. I will be in AT&T Stadium starting Thursday afternoon, as well as all through Friday. But when we come back here on the Penn State Show on DK Sports Radio, we'll switch gears and put a nice pretty bow on spring ball. That and more on the Penn State Show.
Miller Lite is the original light beer, and we'll always brew it to have more taste, with only 96 calories and 3.2 carbs. Because we believe that if you compromise on taste, you can taste the compromise. Miller Lite. Hold true.
Great beer, great responsibility. 2018 Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Average analysis, 12 fluid ounces. Less than 1 gram protein, 0 grams fat.
If you're one of the thousands of Western Pennsylvanians who love to get outdoors, then you need to check out this cool new website, stepoutside.org. Learn where, when, and how you can go camping, hiking, or hunting. Or take part in power sports, shooting sports, or water sports in your local community or across the country at stepoutside.org, where everything you need to know is just a click away. That's stepoutside.org.
What I want from my public accounting firm is big ideas.
But I don't want to lose the personal attention.
My company needs global capabilities.
From a firm with local ownership.
And I want to work with industry experts.
Who take the time to understand my unique challenges. And that's what sets Schneider Downs apart. Expertise for the most complex business issues. With the service you need every day. To learn how our big thinking with a personal focus can help your company, visit schneiderdowns.com.
Injured in an accident? Need assistance in preserving your business's interests? Let the attorneys at Bassey, Vreeland & Associates protect your legal rights. For over 65 years, Bassey, Vreeland & Associates has been representing the citizens and businesses of southwestern Pennsylvania. With offices strategically located in Washington and Charleroi, Bassey, Vreeland & Associates can deliver results for you throughout the Pittsburgh area. Visit www.bmvlaw.com or call 724-228-7000 to see how Bassey, Vreeland & Associates can meet your legal needs. Bassey, Vreeland & Associates. We fight, we care, we win.
Welcome back to the Penn State Show here on DK Sports Radio. I am your host, Audrey Snyder. And this segment, we're going to talk all about spring ball and what it was, what Penn State maybe learned about itself, and kind of what questions remain as the Nittany Lions now wrap up the spring semester. Penn State's players will have final exams starting on Monday. The coaching staff has already been back out recruiting. Jawan Sider was in Northern Virginia a couple days ago. So, again, this thing never ends. It slows down a bit, but certainly it speeds up when you look at recruiting and the next wave of then recruiting camps. And, of course, the busy visit weekend that was the Blue-White weekend this past weekend in Happy Valley. So, what did Penn State find out about itself this spring? Well, for me, I think spring ball, again, you get those 15 practices. You're not going to solve all of your problems by any means, but you are going to start to come to some conclusions, or at least get better facts about the players that you have, about the depth that you're building, and those sorts of things. So the biggest question, or one of the biggest questions that surrounded this team coming into the spring, of course, was the middle linebacker situation and what the Nittany Lions would do at all three spots. And we don't have much clarity after spring ball in that regard. What we did see this spring was that five-star signee, defensive end at the time, Micah Parsons, bounced out from the Mike linebacker spot to the Will. So if you asked me right now, what in the world would Penn State's three starting linebackers, who would they become week one? I would say you'd put Parsons out at the Will, and then the way it looks right now, maybe Cam Brown becomes that guy at the Mike. But also, they've tried Brown out at the Sam as well this spring, so he told me that he's played both of those spots, the Sam and the Mike, this spring. Of course, he previously played the Will. So then what does that mean for Koa Farmer? Jarvis Miller had a really nice spring out at the Sam. So to me, right now, Penn State, they couldn't figure out who their best three linebackers would be if the season started tomorrow. So if defensive coordinator Brent Pry doesn't have the answer to that one, I certainly won't. But I just think you look at it and they realized that, okay, they're going to continue to build this depth and build this position flexibility. But at some point, they have to settle, for lack of a better term, and establish these starters. So I think, by the time they get to the middle of camp, ideally they know before then, but by the sounds of it, they won't. By the time they get to the middle of camp, they're going to have to make some pretty interesting, pretty difficult decisions there. But I think you also have to look at the guys ahead of them, and Kevin Givens, according to defensive coordinator Brent Pry, also had a very productive spring. And this was the most consistent that Penn State's coaches have seen Givens. So Brent Pry said, they feel comfortable that not only what Kevin can do inside, but also what he can do outside at defensive end, which I'm sure you guys remember that's something they did last year when matchups presented himself, and also when injuries mounted, they had to kick him outside. Well, the team has more of a need definitely inside this year than they do outside. But Givens can move around to give you that versatility. And by the sounds of it, that's very much in play for next season. Price said that if they have a matchup that they think Givens, can work occasionally as a defensive end, they're not going to shy away from doing that. So you have that position flexibility, and then behind Windsor and Kevin Givens, one name to know, another guy who had a solid spring was defensive tackle Antonio Shelton. So you look and you say, okay, what's that pecking order there that's kind of been unknown this offseason? Well, the redshirt sophomore certainly looks to be in line to take on a much bigger role. And let's be honest, Penn State is going to need to have depth there, especially in terms of 2 deep, 3 deep, because right now they're going to have to rely on a lot of redshirt freshmen. That's just where this thing is. And Brent Pry also said when Penn State's signees get here this summer, those 3 defensive tackle options will also be in line for playing time. So maybe, although it's always tough to see, defensive linemen come in and play right away, maybe a guy like a PJ Mustafer is somebody who can come in and help them out a little bit. We'll have to see. But that, I think, was definitely an area where they saw growth this spring. And then certainly on the back end of the defense, you look at the Nittany Lions secondary. Really, that's become a strength. Nick Scott and Garrett Taylor were their top 2 safeties this spring. However, that position battle will continue well into the summer, well through August. And I found it really interesting talking with Brent Pry after the spring game and asking him about Lamont Wade and Wade's transition. And I found it pretty telling that Pry said, you know what? They're glad that Wade got these reps at safety after moving from corner to safety this winter. But now they also have to see where he fits best long term. So to me, that of course leaves the door open that maybe we see Lamont Wade back at corner in some situations, or maybe we see him there down the road. But you look at what they're building back there in that secondary between a really deep group of corners, and now they seem pretty pleased with their safeties. And I don't think that's going to be as much of a concern as at least it seemed like that maybe would be a couple months ago. So Garrett Taylor was certainly at a bright spring. Aaron Monroe got healthier as the spring progressed, but now can he stay healthy and can he do it consistently? That we'll have to see. On the other side of the ball for the Nittany Lions, you didn't see Tommy Stevens this spring because of an undisclosed injury, but what you did see or what you maybe didn't see, but at least what we heard about and what we got to see in glimpses in practice, was the fact that Stevens was getting mentally much more comfortable. He was taking a lot of mental reps. Ricky Ronnie said that he was very attentive in meetings, and he'd, ask him questions and just was very succinct in his responses. So this is all very important. And as far as what that Lion role looks like for Tommy Stevens next season, that, of course, we will not know until he actually runs out of the tunnel for a game, because Penn State, like all teams, play personnel decisions very close to the vest. So, what we see more of Tommy Stevens doing, we'll have to see. But we did see in the spring game, Penn State used some more two-back looks. We saw Miles Sanders back there, and at times we saw Sanders back there with running back Mark Allen. And Ronnie was asked after the spring game, what was that about? Is that something that maybe we'll see in the fall? And he laughed and said, well, maybe they'll use it in the fall, but the reason they did it in the spring game was actually because they did not have enough healthy tight ends to really do much else. So you look at it, Danny Dalton really helped himself this spring, but, Jonathan Holland was banged up, wasn't available for all of spring. You look at Nick Bowers, a guy who struggled to stay healthy his entire college career. Didn't see much of him this spring. Zach Kuntz is a young guy who's been on campus for a few months. So realistically, what do you expect to get there? So I think right now, while Penn State certainly hasn't declared a winner at that tight end position by any means, I think Danny Dalton is the lead guy right now, at least in that role, headed into the summer. And we'll have to see, beyond that. And what I think was a good sign for Penn State was the fact that running back Mark Allen, again, he was on the blue team, which was the ones, going against the white team, which was the 2s and the 3s, so take it for what it's worth. But Allen has always been a shifty guy, an impressive guy in the open field, and I thought he made some really nice cuts in the spring game that you say, you know what, he could be a really nice complement when you look at Miles Sanders. So all in all, we'll have to see what Penn State does from here, but spring is in the books. I, of course, will continue to have your Penn State coverage around the clock. We'll see if the Nittany Lions will continue adding to this 2019 recruiting class, which now has 3 members after a pickup of Caden Wallace during Blue White weekend. So, again, we'll have to see what the offseason holds. But until next week, coming to you from rainy but hopefully soon sunny Dallas, this has been Audrey Snyder. Thanks for listening, and take care.